There we go.
Good work. Good stuff.
Okay. We will give it a couple minutes, maybe like 90 seconds before we jump in. We still have some folks filtering in.
Thanks for joining us today.
Mariel, what do you think?
Let's do
30
it.
seconds now?
Let's kick her
Okay.
off. Let's do it.
All right. Okay, cool. So I imagine all of you can see my screen. We will get started. So welcome everyone to this live webinar. Today is Wednesday, June 26th. We are here to talk about fast tracking your software maturity journey, a how-to on implementing a standards program. So hopefully that's what you're here for. If not, we're happy to have you otherwise, but that will be the topic today. So a quick run of show. We'll do a couple housekeeping things. We, on the OpsLevel side, will introduce ourselves. We'll kick off by talking about what are standards. I'm sure you all have a very good understanding, but just to level set for the sake of today, we'll talk about what they are, why you should care about them. And then we'll dive into talking about some crucial prerequisites to rolling out a standards program, aspects of a standards program. And then at the end, we will bring it all to life with Muriel, who will talk about standards in practice in OpsLevel. So a couple housekeeping things. So 10 of you who are here today will be randomly selected to win one of these cheeky t-shirts that you see up here. So stay tuned in your email after. We will select the winners and let you know. We'll have Q&A at the end of today, but do not let that stop you from dropping things in the chat. We have a couple of folks from OpsLevel who I think have introduced themselves, who are there to answer your questions throughout. And then we will share the recording over the next few days for you and for anyone that was not able to attend today. Okay, so let's get started. So with some intros, I'll start. So my name is Louisa. I'm on the customer success team here at OpsLevel. I work with all sorts of current customers. I think a lot of you are here today. So through onboarding and beyond, and with a lot of you about exactly what we'll talk about today, which is rolling out a standards program at your organization. So really happy to be here. And I'm joined by Muriel.
Hey, I'm Muriel. I am a solution consultant. So what that means is when folks are considering if they would like to join the OpsLevel crew, I don't mean as employees, I mean as folks using our platform, I help them figure out, are we going to be a good fit, do some world building, trying to decide how you guys would work well with us. And so a lot of what I do is demos, which is what I will be doing sort of at the end of today's webinar.
Cool. Muriel really simplifies her job. She does more than demoing, but yes, that is a big part of it. Yeah. Okay, awesome. So let's get started. So as I said in kind of the run of show, we like to kind of set the scene talking about what we mean by software standards. And I'll get ahead of it. We use a lot of terms to kind of mean a similar thing in software standards. So you've probably heard us talk about service maturity, software maturity, production readiness, software standards. In our world, they all effectively mean the same thing. We use them to mean the same thing. We could probably quibble about whether or not that is correct, but for the sake of today, we'll talk software standards and why we should care about them. So when we talk about software standards, we mean ensuring a consistent level of quality across your engineering orgs, across your business as a whole, by driving minimum standards that you and teams need to meet in order to really do your jobs, to ship code, to comfortably ship code in a secure way, as well as aspirational goals. And a lot of these to drive towards outcomes, like, and you can see in these kind of bolded, buzzwordy outcomes, improve product quality, increase performance, and reduce delivery time. To bring those a bit more real world, we've seen a lot of successful standard rollouts that have unlocked improvements to things like incident response. They can make you as developers more autonomous in your day-to-days, and they allow teams that are driving these types of programs a mechanism to wrangle a lot of that complexity with big cross-cutting initiatives that are important to the business and giving you tools to do so. So lots of goodness that can come out of a standards program. I think all of that can be summed up into kind of this more like synthesized way that we think about software standards, especially at ops level, is really any work that is defined outside of a service owning team and does not involve building features directly for customers. So again, think about your day-to-day jobs, probably the reasons you became developers in the first place, which is to build cool features and ship code. This is the work that oftentimes exists external of that, although business critical to your various organizations. So keep that in the back of your mind as we kind of talk through today. Okay, so a couple prereqs as we've seen them, as we've worked again with many customers to roll these out, two things that we believe should be true in order to see a lot of success in these types of rollouts. First is executive buy-in and/or alignment. So you and teams, or you will be asking of teams to dedicate this limited resource of time to these types of standards or maturity initiatives. And you and those teams need to have a compelling reason to do so, again, to do this work outside of likely what you are tasked with on a day-to-day. And oftentimes that compelling reason is that it has been decreed from on high that this is important work that is critical to the business. Thus, it should be important to you as a service owning team. So first and foremost, we need to have someone at the top or some people at the top who care about this and are willing to distribute this work to teams. So buy-in and alignment from executives. Second is defined service ownership. This underpins the success of all of this. And oftentimes this looks like a up-to-date, a trustworthy, and accurate service catalog that outlines for me as a service owner really clearly who's responsible for what to make sure that things are not falling through the cracks when I'm doing this type of work. So Muriel will delve into this a bit deeper around like what we exactly mean around defined service ownership and a service catalog. But those are the two prereqs of if we're even going to begin to have this conversation about rolling out a standards or maturity program, these two things are pretty crucial that these are true. Okay, moving on. So when we think about kind of aspects of a standards program, we very much so think of rolling out standards as a cycle versus a straight line. It is a continuous kind of cycle. So we think about these kind of in three distinct phases, and each of these targeting the different personas that should have buy-in for this type of work. So first, there's a need to build a process. And what I mean by that is that the teams that are driving this type of work, oftentimes this is platform teams, SRE teams, developer experience teams, we work with all types of personas. We need to have a pretty tight process around communicating and tracking this type of work, these changes, these initiatives to the service owning teams. It doesn't work well when they're kind of ad hoc and, oh, we think of this and we need to blast it in a million Slack channels. We need to have a process and a business process that is tied to this type of work. Second is routine. And this is more targeted for you all as service owners, you all who are being tasked with this operational work. We need to have a way of incorporating this into the day-to-day work that we do as developers. So versus, it being kind of side of the desk work that we get to when we can, how do we bring this into the fabric of the development work that we do on a day-to-day? Because again, we tie back to those prereqs. It is of importance. It is things that we are being tasked with. So routine is number two. And then lastly is reporting. And this is targeted for everyone, but largely for engineering leadership and folks that really have a vested interest in this type of standards work and maturity work being done and complete. So reporting is kind of this third tenet or aspect of standards in providing that visibility around metrics of how we are progressing towards these initiatives. Okay, and last thing I will highlight before I hand it over to Muriel, which will be the exciting part, bringing this life. So when we think about a standards tracker, so we've kind of talked about the high level, like what should be true when we're thinking about rolling out a program, the various aspects of it. When we think about actually bringing this to life in practice, when we think about a way to track this, a way to drive this, there are also a few things we should be thinking about. And we will cover all of these in real life in a few minutes as well. But 3 things: aligned. We've talked about this 6 times already. There's executive buy-in around getting this work done. That is foundational, like bedrock of this type of program succeeding, is we need alignment and executive buy-in to do this work. Probably sick of hearing me say that. Second is consolidated. So all of the requirements for you as a driving team, you as a service owner, all of my requirements for my services, my systems, all of my estate are in one place. And then lastly is prioritized. It's clear as a service owner what needs to be done first and why. So assuming these 3 things are true, aligned, consolidated, and prioritized, we can assume that we'll have a successful means and mechanism of tracking these types of standards. And we'll show you some real world examples in OpsLevel. So with that, Muriel, I will pass it over to you and you take a screen share.
Sounds good. All right. So I am going to start by talking about some definitions. I want to define some terms really high level and then go into more detail when we're looking at the actual OpsLevel platform. And the things I'm going to define, there's going to be 4 terms. These are going to fall under one of 3 major categories. So the first category is measure. So you want to be able to measure how your standards are stacking up against your services and see, are your services actually hitting those maturity standards you've set? The second category is monitor. So this is how you actually figure out, are the services hitting those standards you've set? The last category is action. So this has to do more with the work of actually getting your standards set and making sure your services are adhering to them, because people are always concerned about, how much work am I going to have to be able to do in order to make this happen? So let's get into the definitions. The first is rubric. The rubric is a set of global standards that let you define what a mature service looks like for your organization. So think of the rubric as a way to set a standard that could apply to any service in your account. It doesn't have to, but these are just generally best practices as far as getting things done. So that's the first definition. The second definition, scorecards. So scorecards are another way to enforce your service maturity standards. Scorecards allow teams to measure and track service health against their own unique goals, separate from the organizational standards established in the main rubric. And with scorecards and the rubric, sort of a metaphor I like to use to describe these things is, think of these as walls that you've built around your product offering. This is a way for you to protect your product offering through your services from things like, unexpected downtime or all sorts of unexpected issues that might arise from, things not being set up properly or that sort of a thing. So these are protective walls you're going to set up. Second definition was scorecards. Third definition is checks. So if we're using that wall metaphor, checks are the bricks that make up the wall. So checks are the driving force behind scorecards and the rubric. And with checks, you can codify your best practices around building and operating microservices, and then measure how these practices are followed across your entire organization. So this is just a way to figure out, how are our services actually doing in terms of the standards we've set. The fourth and final definition is campaign. This is our last vocab word for the day. Campaigns are a set of capabilities for planning, running, and reporting on engineering initiatives. So these are short-term projects, and the way these overlap with service maturity is people use these as a way to painlessly implement new service standards. So that's the vocab for today. When I was preparing my portion of this webinar, I do some practicing because I want to do a good job for you folks. I found myself saying one word quite a bit, so I decided to lean into that. We have a word of the day, and that word is checks. You will probably get tired of hearing me say this. I would suggest taking a sip of coffee every single time I say this word, but I don't want to be responsible for you having a bad caffeine time. So instead of that, let's just get into the demo and show this stuff in action. So I'm going to start my demo segment by talking about the service catalog, because you are not going to be able to set or track your standards without a solid service catalog. All the checks you would write are going to be built around your services. So you've got to have some services in place to start that service maturity journey. And we have 5 different ways to populate a service catalog. We have Terraform, we have GraphQL, we have a Kubernetes syncer that you can sync to your clusters and bring over applications from there. We have YAML files. If you pop one of those in one of your repos, we can use the information in that file to build out a service for you. The 5th and final way, we can make things really easy. Anything you instrument, any tool that you have in your tool chain, if you send that payload to OpsLevel, we'll inspect it for service identifiers. So using this catalog engine, you can automate your catalog discovery and your catalog completeness. And you may have noticed this column over here of Olympic medals. My services can obtain a level of beginner, bronze, silver, or gold. And let's use the catalog service as a way to explore how OpsLevel determines which level to assign to a service. And in this case, the level this service has obtained is bronze. We consider that production ready. And the level a service achieves is based on how many of the rubric checks that service passes. So as a reminder, the rubric is a set of global standards used to determine a service's maturity level, and you can dictate which checks are going to apply to your services based on things like language, framework, associated business units, the tier the service is on, whatever else is important to you. And these are checks. These are as well. Checks can be based off of service information, your code and configurations, and also your infrastructure metadata. So an example of a check that is based on service information is this owner-defined check. So what we're doing here is, for this service, as represented in OpsLevel, we're checking to see, are there people that are associated with this service? So what this does for you is, in the event of like an outage, or just maybe you have a question about some code that has to do with this service, you're going to have someone you can chat with. It's not going to be a mystery. So a check like this prevents orphan services. And a check that has to do with metadata coming from a different tool. This silver JFrog check right here is a good example. So what we're doing with this is JFrog sends us a little packet of information. You can write up some logic in here that'll kind of parse through that and find the information that you care about. So in this particular situation, we are looking for critical vulnerabilities found in artifacts. And you will notice we are not passing this one. So as the person who's responsible for fixing this, I can see I have, action required. It's this type of issue. And I even have some information here about how I might go about fixing that issue to make sure that we're going to pass this check and our service is able to handle these types of issues. Now, everything I've shown so far has to do with the rubric. And you may remember that there is another way to make sure that your services are up to standards, and that is through scorecards. And if I click this radio button here, you are going to see these numbers next to these little medals go up. You're also going to see more checks appear right over here. So we created scorecards as sort of a choose your own adventure option for folks using OpsLevel. So the idea with this here is, teams and, probably certain products or certain tiers of services are going to need their own standards in addition to what you do with the global rubric. So for example, with this service in front of us right now, this is a Ruby language service. And you'll notice I've got some checks here that have to do with Ruby. I've got Ruby Rails and a gem file check. Next, let's break down an individual check, and you can get an idea of how they're built. And I actually want to show you one in the gold category. Let's look at that aspirational stuff. This is a good one. Code owner's file. Let's go look at this one. So this is a repo grep check. It is in the gold category, and the name is short and sweet and to the point. It's very clear what we're doing here. We're trying to look for a code owner's file. Got a filter applied. This has to do with my tier 3 and above services. I've also got an owner associated with this. This is optional, but I think it's a nice thing to do just to give people an idea of who's implementing this and who cares about this. This here is where we're actually getting into the meat of what we're doing with this check. So we are looking for a file. We're not too fussed about the path. We don't really care where it is, but we want to know, does it have code owners in the name? Does that exist? And this is more best practices stuff here, optional, but a good thing to do. You can actually provide notes to the folks who are going to be looking at these checks so that they get an idea, and you can pretty it up and make it all nice with some markdown. Why is this important? How to pass this check? I think this is just a best standard to apply to these. And the last bit here has to do with, is this going to be live now, later, at all? So you can have your checks be disabled. And what's nice about that is you can still see a report to see how do your services stack up against this standard without affecting the maturity level or, having scary red X's show up on your service. You can enable it right away. That's what we're doing here. We're going for it. We want to see if we're passing this or not. Another option is enable it later. So this is a way to set a date when this is going to be live, and it gives people a chance to see how their services are going to match up against the standard without sort of affecting their levels right away, but you give them a very clear deadline for when this thing needs to get done. So that is the anatomy of an individual check. And when I'm chatting with folks about all of this, and I do it a fair amount just in my day-to-day, I don't usually have to spend a lot of time explaining why these sorts of things are important. Why would you care about having an owner associated with your services? Why would you care about logging passwords to disk? I don't spend a ton of time doing that because people get that. That's not where their concerns are. Their concerns are usually around implementation. And that's because I have never met anybody in the developer or DevOps world who would say that they have an abundance of free time. Anytime a new initiative is discussed, the first and foremost concern is time. Do we have enough cycles to get this done? Is this worth investing any cycles at all? And if you sit your team down and you say, hey, so starting tomorrow, we have 8 standards that need to be applied to the service that you own in order for it to be considered production ready. People might leave that meeting feeling a little bit overwhelmed, even though, they probably know that having a long, lovely list of standards is a really good way to make sure your services are going to be healthy and the code you write is going to perform well and make your customers happy. So I usually have 2 things to say in response to people expressing concerns about this. The first is that in the internal developer portal space, OpsLevel is the best option for getting a quick return on investment for doing this type of work. It's going to be the easiest to implement, and you're going to be seeing results really quickly. So that's kind of the first thing I say. If you're already a customer of ours, you made a good choice. If you're considering becoming a customer of ours, maybe, add that as part of the calculus when you're making your decision about who to pick. The second thing I will say is, and this is something we do better than our competitors as well, we have some tooling that's going to make it a lot easier for you to implement these standards, and that is through campaigns. Campaigns are a way of setting up and acting out on some short-term projects. So our customers use them for a number of things. They do stuff like burn down tech debt. They also use them to implement standards. So let's use that example of like the list of 8 standards we have to hit. They might go through that list and group together the things that are kind of similar, things that would make sense to tackle all at the same time. And then they go at those subcategories, one by one, and it makes the process of getting things done a lot less painful. So maybe you've been putting off upgrading your Rails and your Ruby, even though you are getting close to the point of no return, and they're going to be deprecated, and there are some security concerns that go along with that. You can build a campaign that's going to help you get that work done. And here is another word of the day mention. You can have checks with campaigns as well. And the checks that are associated with campaigns while the campaign is ongoing, only live here. They're not part of your rubric or scorecards. These are just to see, we've got this campaign in progress. Are we hitting the goals that we want to hit? It's the way that you define the work you want to do and check up and see how much of that work has already been completed. And you can see that some filters have been applied to these checks here. These have to do with Ruby language. So I want to make sure that only the services that have Ruby as the language set are going to be affected by this campaign. I don't want my JavaScript services to get pulled into all this. So great stuff right there. And there's no reason to set up a stand-up in order to make sure this stays on track. You can send out reminders right from OpsLevel. And you may have caught this, you may not have. On the overview page, I actually have an update that's going to be going out on July 1st. So that's already in the works, and I can track and see that's going to be happening. So you can also see pretty easily which of the affected services are on track with the work that they are supposed to do and how that's progressing over time. You can also see which of the affected services are not quite done with getting this work done. And with the start and end date, you can make it really clear to folks when this work needs to get done. With the project brief, you can make it really clear why. You can also link out appropriate resources just to make people's lives a little bit easier. And it's just going to make people's lives a whole heck of a lot nicer. And where we get into where this touches on service maturity standards, when you end a campaign, you will have the option to take those campaign checks that previously, up till now, only lived in this campaign. You can add them to your rubric and your scorecard. So these can be standards applied to your services moving forward. So hopefully this will, make you guys feel a little bit better about the idea of, setting up an aggressive service maturity program for yourselves. Hopefully this gives you a sense of how we can help make that a little bit easier. All right, well, that is all the time we have for the demo today. Louisa and I have some time now at the end of our webinar to chat with you folks about any questions you might have and, hopefully start up a dialogue.
Muriel, we've gotten a couple that I can feed to you specific to checks, and then I can take some other ones that are not so much. Okay, first one, having developers in quotes complete checks seems like a lot of work. Can the check be run automatically?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. So checks can be like a manual check off, which I think is sort of what you're thinking of when where that question's coming from. But in terms of checks that have to do with, and I'll show you the checks so you can just get your little eyeballs on it. Things like that JFrog check that I mentioned before, this is all done automatically. So you set the check up and you say, I'm going to be expecting information from JFrog, and I want to look for critical vulnerabilities. Once you finish that setup, JFrog can just send you information, and it's going to run through that automatically and give you the, thumbs up or thumbs down. Is it passed or not? Same thing with that repo grep check that we talked about in the gold category. So for this here, this is automatic as well. You set this check up, and since, hopefully you've already got your Git forge associated with OpsLevel, it's going to be able to go in and check out your code and see, does that code owner's file exist? So if someone went in and accidentally deleted that or added a space here or something, it would also report that's not there anymore if you've been passing that check. So that stuff all gets automated. It's going to be a lot less work than doing it all manually.
Cool. Another one. How can OpsLevel help us with tracking forgotten services, say services that have not been updated in a long time?
That's a good question. So the first thing I would say in terms of forgotten services, I want to call back to the owner defined. That's a big thing. Because often what ends up happening is someone just kind of makes a service. They don't attach a person or a team to it. And then 2 years later, maybe that person has moved on to a different job and we have no idea what that service is who's responsible for it. So that's the first line of defense. The second line of defense, I would say you can do things like build checks based off of deploys. So if you have deploys being sent into OpsLevel, you can build a check around, has not received deploy in X many days. Same thing with like a Dependabot check. You can build checks around that. So it's just kind of a way to make sure that there's some activity and action around that service. And if I missed anything, Louisa, keep me honest about that.
Yeah, I think the only other one to point out is with our catalog engine, we can continually scan repos and surface things that way, or to surface things, that way. We can also, as Muriel mentioned, sync data from Kubernetes, so we can have like a continuous reconcile happen. Yeah, I think you covered the other ones, but it's a good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. How to keep those services from getting dusty. I mean, it's a big part of what we help people do.
Yes. Okay, I can take this one. We had a question around, besides executive buy-in, are there any other ways or use cases that customers have to drive this type of operational work? Short answer is yes. I will caveat it by saying a lot of times, even these other use cases do require some sort of executive presence or alignment. I think they fall into two categories. First and foremost is like a dedicated time initiative. So 20% of team sprint times are dedicated to operational work that is understood across all parts of the business. So 80% of their time is spent, doing what their day-to-day job is. The other 20% of time is dedicated to doing this type of standards work. So that's one. We have a lot of customers that have adopted that kind of dedicated time methodology. And the other one that we see fewer customers, although many are there or getting there, it is a relatively quote unquote mature way of driving this type of work, is we actually have customers that deploy gate based upon maturity levels. So whether it's services must be in bronze or silver in order to deploy, that is we've been tied into their CD processes in such a way that they have to achieve certain levels in order to ship. So again, there's a lot of things that need to be true for this to work. There's oftentimes some change management and again that executive alignment that has to be true for this to work, and also clear understanding of the levels and of the categories. But for folks that choose this route, it works really well. So I think those are kind of the top three. It's dedicated time, it's executive buy-in as its own category, but also a through line for all of them, and then deploy gating.
Nice. Very good question.
Very good question. Okay, let's see. I think we had one other one, but I think you kind of covered it with like a couple check types, but someone did ask, we have some of this check type data in other tools like Sneak, or we're gonna put a list, but they just gave one example. What's the value of having that in OpsLevel? I think you probably alluded to that, but
yeah, I mean, part of it is machines are really good at providing huge amounts of information, and they can process it a lot faster than we can. And sort of the problem that we're all sort of dealing with, I think, in the tech world, I think everybody I know is, regardless of their role, dealing with this. We're being asked to process absolutely bonkers amounts of information that our little, electricity meat brains can't really handle. And so what's really great about these checks and OpsLevel is you can say ahead of time, this is what I care about. Don't tell me about anything else. I'm not that worried about anything else. And so using something like a sneak check is a way to surface, oh, there are critical vulnerabilities associated with this service. And there's 5 of them, and we need to go work on that. So that's kind of the aspect I think I didn't really discuss as much, which is we help you kind of cut through all the noise of what actually matters for these services. and how do we actually future-proof things and make sure that we're addressing the correct things. So I wanted to sort of add that on top of it.
Cool. Okay, well that was all for questions, but by no means, if you think of something later, please reach out to us. If you're a customer of ours, drop it in our Slack channel or reach out to someone. If you're not, well, Muriel, maybe, I don't know. We'll find a way to get in touch with us. But yeah, so I would say look out for t-shirt winners in your email as well as recording. But really appreciate all of you for joining today. We love talking about this stuff and evangelizing it. So we really appreciate you joining. Oh yeah, thank you, Megan. info@OpsLevel. Okay, we'll break there. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Bye.